Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are at. This is Donald and Michelle, and we've taken a little bit of time off from doing a podcast. So we thought we wanted to get back in and throw some information out. Her thoughts, histhoughts.com, website where you can go and you can listen and you can follow. You can schedule life coaching with Michelle at that website. So, a lot of things going on in our lives and a lot of fun things. Really excited about the feedback that we received over the last couple of podcasts. Just excited to share what's been going on in our lives and share our thoughts. And happy that some people find it of value. Michelle, do you want to say hello before we get started?
Hi.
Is that it? That's it.
That's it for now.
That's
I
it
talk
for
a
now.
lot, so.
This is going to be another. We don't consider them deep dives because it's just the way we talk. But we're going to try and get into something. Maybe a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
Month and a half
Maybe
ago.
2 months.
2 months ago. Michelle and I sat on a panel at our church, and it was a dating panel. So it was for people that were dating, and Michelle and I obviously are no longer dating.
Not officially. Not like that.
No, we're dating each other though. We're dating each other, but we're no longer dating.
Different podcast.
But there was a question that was asked during that, and I thought that it was a great question, and we're going to dive deeper into the question and what we could do on the panel today. And the question was essentially, what were a couple things that you guys needed to change in order to date well? We have talked about during the panel just the mistakes and the issues in our first marriages, and then some of the messed up parts of our dating lives, separate and together, after those first marriages. And then we've been blessed that we think that we've figured some things out through study and counseling and all that fun stuff. So I thought that was a great question. What were a couple things that you really needed to change in order to date well? Did you have a different spin on that question?
No, I think that's great. So just a little bit of history about Donald and I and our dating. We dated for way too long.
Way too long.
We broke up so many times. I don't even have a number. But we would push up to the wall of needing to make a bigger commitment and break up. And in some of those breakups, I think there was really good growth that happened individually. But we, in a nutshell, were not ready to date well when we started dating.
Right.
And it caused a lot of angst and a lot of conflict, and just it was kind of a mess. And so we jokingly say we didn't date well until we were engaged.
Right. And we dated really well for about 6 or 7 months at that point.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk a little bit about that, and maybe that's where we'll start. So there's some different things that I'm hoped to cover, but maybe we'll start there. As you're dating, I think there's something that we've learned that we really have to figure out. If you haven't figured it out by now, Michelle and I both are deeper thinking, deeper diving type people. And we found that we had a counselor that said this to us, that we were dealing in a committed relationship level. We were dealing with committed relationship level issues without the commitment.
What she actually said was we were dealing with marriage issues without the marriage.
All right.
There's a difference.
Yeah. So, and that kind of struck us, and I found that to be really interesting. So that's one of the things that I think that you have to identify as you're dating. What type of issues are you dealing with as a couple, and are those issues correct for your your stage of dating. For instance, there's things that are committed issues, and really where we believe that you're in committed relationships, and things that we were dealing with and we were talking about, when in actuality we wanted to tell ourselves we were still just kicking it.
Oh, we didn't.
Well, I mean, we didn't know we were necessarily mismatching in our
That's
commitment
true.
levels to each other
Absolutely.
and what we were talking
Absolutely.
about.
Yeah.
So, any examples of that come to your mind?
Well, I have so many examples, but we would talk about. Well, okay, so let's just get it out there. The biggest mismatch that we had was sex. We were having sex.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
whether we like it or not, sex changes relationships.
Yes.
And it changes the way that you view relationships, and it changes your connection. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I knew that until after I got so headfirst deep into the trouble with it.
Yeah.
That I figured it out.
Well, and that's been fascinating because you hear it all the time, and if you go to church at all, you hear pastors talk about it. And it's very interesting that Michelle and I will tell you that we dated very well for 6 months, and it's after we became engaged. And what happened at that point is that we had a pastor who we really, really, really believe in everything that she has ever told us, and we affectionately say, if Kelly says, then we do. And Kelly had taken us all the way through marriage counseling and everything else. And then we were having one of our last meetings with Kelly, and she said, "Hey guys, there's one more thing." And we were like, "Kelly, this has been hard enough.
We're tired.
What's the one more thing?" And she said, "You know what? From here on out, I need you to abstain." And that was a shock to our systems. But we can look back today, and given some things that we've gone through in our lives and in our marriage, and say, wow, that 6 months has allowed us to be successful today. And it's really when we started dating well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's funny because, you always see things better like in the rear view mirror in retrospect. But when I look back on it now, I see how when I was not dating well and having sex with different people and things like that, how that tainted my ability to appreciate sex in marriage. And we don't like to talk about it, but whether you can see it in the moment or not, it really does change how you feel about your sex life in marriage, how you feel about yourself in marriage. And there's just all this tendency for comparison, and it allows you to know things you shouldn't know.
Yeah.
And I think so. I mean, sex is what it is, and I don't want to dwell on that because that isn't the only place that we didn't date well.
Right.
But I do think if I had to say number one thing, that's probably it.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And I think another thing is that Michelle was involved and I was involved in decision making at a very small level surrounding each other's kids.
Yes.
We would talk and seek advice and seek guidance from one another about things going on with our children and our ex-spouses.
Yes.
And those are things that are really personal, and it's I could give all the advice to Michelle I want, and tomorrow I could be gone, and that's really not fair when you are dealing with such big issues. If you're going to deal with big issues together, you've got to be beyond the kicking it stage. I mean, you really should be, in our opinion, at some level of a good commitment level. I believe that in today's world, it's a pretty good habit to get into, to every now and then check base with each other to determine where we at. And you should be able to know where you're at based upon the types of things you're talking about. if you're out having nachos, which Michelle and I did a lot at midnight, we should be talking about, the ball game, how was your day at work, and this and that, to really talk about budget and finances and kids and things like that. That's well beyond just kicking it, because you are ingraining yourself into someone else's life.
So we talked about in the last podcast the book, The Sacred Marriage. And I can't let this whole podcast go without talking about the book. It's called The Sacred Search. Same author. It's
Yes.
Gary Thomas. And if you really want to know how to date well, that is absolutely one of the best books that I've ever read on how to date well. And, one of the concepts in there that just goes against everything, certainly that I did in my life, and how the, I guess, world in general views dating, that dating needs to be with a purpose. And
Yes.
you can have
Yes.
friends,
Yes.
and you can hang out with friends, but when you start dating, the purpose of dating is to find your helpmate.
Correct.
And anything short of that, and if you're not ready for that, then dating gets messy.
Right. Correct. Yeah, that's really interesting, is that dating is for a purpose. Dating is not necessarily to have somebody to go to the movies with.
Yeah.
Have somebody to go to the movies with is a friend.
Yes.
And so there's very clear distinctions that I think that now what Michelle and I are telling you is where we messed up. We didn't necessarily follow those distinctions, and we've been able to read and talk to people and look back and say, mistake was made there. But I want to get back to the original question. So what were some things that you felt as if you needed to change in order to date well? So we're now into the dating. We're not kicking it anymore.
Yeah.
We're dating.
Well, I think the number one thing was I had to be honest with myself and honest with you. I think that there was such a period of time where I felt like I was walking a tight wire, trying to either convince myself that I didn't want what I knew I wanted, or convince Donald that he wanted something that he wasn't wanting. And I think at some point it just became such a heavy burden that I had to just draw a line and be really real about, look, this is what I want, and anything short of this is just going to make us both miserable.
I think that obviously communication is a key to dating well. And I'm going to talk about maybe further down the road, not just dating, but like actually in once you're starting to get into some commitment, some serious commitment levels in your dating life. Michelle has coined this term, and it's a term that I really want to drop on you. And maybe we'll do a whole podcast on this term. You guys tell us whether or not you're interested in hearing more about it. But Michelle and I believe in a term called a sin bucket. We all have sins that are phenomenal.
A disposition to certain sins.
Oh my gosh, we have some sins that are just fun. And what we do is we run to those certain sins whenever we get tired, or we get weary, or things don't go well, or whatever it is. We have a bucket, a toolbox, if you will, over in the corner that we can run to that can temporarily fix things. So I think that as you get further down your dating life, and you're with a safe partner, you have to start to unveil your sin bucket. And at the same time that you're doing that, I think that as an individual, you really have to start to understand what your triggers are. For instance, my triggers to my sin bucket is fatigue. Absolutely. When I get tired, I am more apt to reach for the sin bucket than when I'm well rested, I'm working out, and I'm doing everything else that I need to do. When I get fatigued, I am looking for a quick fix, and I reach for my sin bucket. And the sin bucket could be a ton of other things. Could be eating, could be drinking, could be porn, could be affairs. Anything that is outside the realm is a sin bucket reach. So I don't want people to think that, oh, you know what, I don't have a sin bucket because I'm not out sleeping around. That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about what do you reach for instead of reaching to someone and going to them and having communication.
Well, and I think, it's really important to know that we all, as people, reach the end of our line. And, we have tools to deal with stress, to deal with fatigue, to deal with any of the things that come at us. But eventually we run out of tools.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're searching for something. And there's an inner longing and an inner searching that happens in all of us. And we have to control how we answer the call.
Yes. And it's very difficult in dating I believe it's very difficult in dating to answer the call well, because you've got to have a safe place to answer the call. Now, we like to think that it's easier in marriage, but I will say that unless marriage is built on a safe place, it's no easier. So that's one of the things I think is real important as you're dating, to start to evaluate safe places. Where is it safe for me to really let somebody in? Where is it safe for me to share this with somebody? Where is it safe for me to say, hey, look, I'm tired right now and this is what I need?
Mm-hmm. And truly, I think it's about vulnerability and transparency.
Yeah.
And, when we really boil it down, we're bad as people, just as a whole. We are bad at being vulnerable and transparent. And, I say this a lot, and I don't mean to just pass it off as something easy, but I think the first place that you need to learn how to be vulnerable and transparent is in your prayer life. Because God already knows everything, and so you're never surprising him with information. But it's hard to know when the right time is to be vulnerable and to be transparent, but that's it's a skill that you have to acquire, and that's what helps build true intimacy.
Well, and I think that's where it becomes really, all of this stuff, and Michelle and I will come at almost everything we talk about from as we understand a biblical base, because everything, I used to always say that I didn't have an example of a great leader, or I didn't have an example of a great family, or I didn't have an example of this or that. And one of the guys in my small group really hit me over the head with it and said, Don, you've got the perfect example, you just don't read the right book. And so even when you're dating and you're like, I don't know how to do this, well, Christ has said how to be in relationship with him. And how to be in relationship with him, he's created environments in life where we can practice those relationships with each other. And we have to practice them well. And the other thing I think that we need to do a lot is to stop and evaluate where we're at, so we don't just keep running down this wrong path. And I coach, so I talk all the time about stop and look at game film. One of the things that I got to the point of doing is I would go out with Michelle and I'd come back home and I'd go through the game film. Okay, is that okay? Is what happened okay? Are we good? And I think that we don't always do that. We look at, hey, I was hurt, or hey, I was this, or hey, I was that, instead of looking at, okay, how is this interaction? Does this interaction line up with what we're trying to achieve? So I don't know if we really got to the core, but Michelle and I could talk for hours about this. We're trying to keep these to really concise, quick hits for you. So I'm going to ask Michelle, is there anything that you want to drop on anybody listening about dating that you think is we can't get away from this without talking about from a dating perspective?
I just think in general that when you're looking for a good person to date or a healthy dating relationship, you need to be okay with being uncomfortable. I think that there are moments in relationships that are just uncomfortable, and you need to really make peace with it in your dating relationship, because it'll happen in marriage too. But certainly just change comes when you're willing to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think that that's hard,
Yeah.
right? Because we don't want to be hurt in relationships. So sometimes we're making decisions to be at a different place than someone else is when we're dating, but that's kind of part of it.
Absolutely.
And we have to learn, just like we have to learn to discern the voice of God, we have to learn how to discern things among each other.
And ourselves.
That's
Yes,
very good.
absolutely.
That's very good.
We'll talk about this so many more times. This is a whole big thing.
Yeah, and we talk about it a lot. So hopefully you got something out of it, and hopefully you enjoyed it. HerThoughtsHisThoughts.com. Go there, click on the button, subscribe. Let Michelle know that you like to hear from her, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Okay.
Bye,
Thanks.
guys.
Bye.